Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's always interesting coming back to these chambers where I spent almost 13 years, so I'm very glad that you all were able to join us. This is a really important moment. In 2017, our Ellicott City Master Plan, as you know, was started and designed to establish a comprehensive, community-driven vision for rebuilding our flood-impacted Ellicott City. Obviously, the 2018 flood changed that conversation. And upon taking office last year in December, it was important for me that our administration developed a comprehensive strategy called our Ellicott City Safe and Sound Plan. And the focuses and the pillars of that strategy were, of course, the need for a public safety, a safer Ellicott City, supporting all of our businesses and property owners, preparing our county for the increasing intensity and frequency of storms in a changing climate, and creating a more inclusive, community-driven process for our decisions moving forward in Ellicott City. And now that we have established the foundation for the flood mitigation with the Safe and Sound Plan, the master plan will now provide the concepts to enhance Ellicott City over the long term. So I was very pleased to restart the master plan process this summer so that we can build those resilient solutions to keep Ellicott City a city that is almost 250 years strong for the next 250 years. And so, working with DPZ, we had an open house to select, to get some of your input, and we're pleased that we actually had several hundred comments. And frankly, we were very impressed by the thoughtfulness and the depth of many of these comments that will help our city be resilient. So with those comments in mind, our master plan consultants have now prepared new and refined concepts, and those will be on display tonight. And I just want to let you know that our master plan continues to get better based upon your thoughts and your feedback. So tonight's meeting is the 7th in a series since 2017. And after this meeting, our Department of Planning and Zoning will be launching another online input opportunity that will be available for several weeks. And I invite all of our residents and businesses to take advantage of this opportunity. Your commitment to this process has been invaluable to get us to this point and will be invaluable as we write that next chapter in Ellicott City's future. And so as we continue to understand the topics that are most important to you, we can develop those priorities for implementation in both the near and long term. So this draft plan will be released in early 2020, and you'll get an opportunity to review and comment on it. And with your comments, the plan will then be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission and our Planning Board. And this plan will then be submitted as legislation for adoption by the County Council. And I want to take this moment to acknowledge and recognize Councilmember Liz Walsh and her team. Liz has been an active participant and really has demonstrated, if you haven't had an opportunity to talk with her, her love of Ellicott City and her desire to help it be that resilient, safe place. And I know that together all of us will continue to show not just the rest of Howard County or Maryland or even the region, but the nation and the world what an example of resiliency, unity, and coming back looks like. An example of making it so that when everyone else who is dealing with flooding or the challenges of today, they can look forward and look to us for those solutions of tomorrow. So I thank you so much for your engagement and helping to create a better, brighter Ellicott City.
Thank you, Dr. Ball. I'm going to be very brief. I'm Val Asens. I'm the Planning Director for Howard County. And a lot's happened since the last meeting that we had back in October of 2018. Various initiatives from Safe and Sound have been started up. Recently, with the passage of council bills, stormwater management requirements have been tightened up in the Plumtree and the Tiber Branch watersheds. And County Council basically passed the most and highest standards that the county has had so far in terms of managing stormwater. So tonight we're going to talk about Ellicott City. The presentation is divided into two parts. First, we're going to talk about some broad topics that include flood mitigation, environmental sustainability, transportation and parking, economic development, and community character and placemaking. The second part will cover some new and refined concepts for various parts of Ellicott City, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions and provide comments between those two. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom McGilloway from Mahan Reichel, and he'll be doing our presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Val. Good evening, everyone. So we're going to, as Val said, we'll go through several of the advanced concepts. Some of the concepts we hear that we're showing tonight have not changed from the last time, but there's a lot of refinements since the Safe and Sound plan. So brief introduction. The focus of this effort will be the master plan guidelines and concepts. Our team, just a review, I'm with Mahan Reichel Associates located in Baltimore. We have RK&K engineers, Matt Tominson's with us, Land Studies, Ward Oberholzer is with us. Arnett Muldrow Associates have done economic development and community branding, preservation consulting, Lisa Wingate, and then South Coast Consulting. So this is the team that we've been working since 2017. The presentation focus is really grounded in the safe and sound flood mitigation. I want to emphasize that we're not here tonight to revisit the alternatives in the safe and sound. We're proceeding with the selected alternative from that. It's also grounded in the online engagement. We were really impressed with the thoughtful comments that we got back from the online engagement. And then it's also based on a lot of the input we've had since we began the process in 2017. So as Val had indicated, the master plan guidelines and concepts, we'll be talking about those in two parts, the larger frameworks and then the concepts by area. And then at the end, there'll be additional online engagement based on this presentation to get further input. So we're not going to go into detail on the recent online engagement, but the summary that occurred over the summer, but essentially it ran from July 26th to August 11th. 93 participants, and there really was a broad range of comments, diversity of opinions, themes on topics, and geographic areas summarized. And as I said, there were really a lot of thoughtful input, and a lot of that input has been incorporated into our planning work. So the full summary is on this web link. You can go and read in detail the information that's been summarized there. So as we look at the master plan guidelines and concepts, we want to reemphasize, highlight and summarize again the vision and goals, and then go into the plan frameworks. One of the things I want to emphasize is that with a master plan like this is really a long-term guiding plan. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen just within the time span of the safe and sound. Some of the comments that we saw in the online engagement, there was a fear, and rightfully so, of all these construction projects happening at one time, and that's not how it's going to work. This is probably a 20-year plus plan. The safe and sound mitigation will happen in the next 5 to 7 years, and then a number of the projects that we're showing here are going to be occurring after that. The other thing to emphasize is the master plan really encompasses a number of elements. There's public safety, there's flood strategies, historic preservation, economic development, and so forth. And while all of these are important bedrocks in the formation of the plan, not one of them really trumps the other. And there's almost a tension, or there's a balance among some of these, and no one, we can't plan for 100% for any one of these. Sometimes there have to be choices made. Sometimes those are tough choices to balance and get the right mix. It's also a plan that's going to be implemented by the public sector, but there's a lot of elements that are going to be implemented by the private sector as well. So the vision, just a reminder, the safe and sound goals, ensuring public safety, supporting business and property owners, retaining Ellicott City's historic charm, and developing a more inclusive, community-driven process. So this is an important foundation of this effort. This is just a map diagram showing some of the locations of the safe and sound conveyance improvements. The core, the rectangular box is in the core. That includes the tunnel, as well as some other conveyance improvements in the West End area. And then we have the dry flood mitigation ponds that are circled in red throughout the watershed. So these are all the improvements associated with the 3G 7.0 concept that was selected. There are some other improvements, such as the Church Lane storm drain improvements that aren't identified on here, but some other things that are included that weren't actually part of the safe and sound. The vision statement, the part in blue is what we had left off with last year, that Ellicott City and its watershed is a model resilient community that thrives by protecting its people, commerce, history, cultural, and natural environment. We've added in, and by enhancing its vibrant and authentic character, and I think as we looked at input, as we talked with more stakeholders, we had a lot in here about protecting what's here, but we really weren't capturing that we really want to enhance what's here as well, and so we added that into the vision statement. The goals 2 through 6 continue over from where we left off, but we added in goal number 1, building off the safe and sound, protecting our residents, employees, and visitors. And these goals permeate through all of the recommendations in the plan. So now I'd like to hit the plan frameworks. These 5 main categories that we'll go through, a couple slides on each one of these. And we're calling these frameworks, and we broke these out separately because these are all aspects of the plan that are interrelated to each other. They don't necessarily apply to one geographic area. Some of them, such as parking and some of the flood mitigation, what you do in one area will impact some of the decisions that you make in other areas. So we wanted to talk about these more in terms of networks, and then go in so that you have this framework in mind as we talk about specific areas. And we've set this presentation up that each section we have a series of guidelines that kind of frame the aspirations and the efforts of the master plan. So with flood mitigation, go through some of these quickly, that we really want to achieve other planning goals through flood mitigation projects wherever that's practical. So rather than just implementing a straight engineering flood mitigation project, how can we achieve other things, goals with the plan? We want to continue to monitor and evaluate the need for additional flood mitigation after the safe and sound projects have been built. When planning additional flood mitigation projects, we want to include strategies to reduce the impacts associated with storm debris. That's keeping debris out of the channels that potentially clog the tunnel and other culverts is a real challenge here. And then when planning additional flood mitigation projects, we got to explore ways to minimize flood impacts with the Patapsco River. So we had talked the last time we presented to you, we did talk a lot about debris management, and we've added in here stream restoration. So on the left of the slide, different techniques for creating debris snares in the channels, mainly in the upper channels in the watershed. This helps to trap debris while allowing the water to flow through. And we shared some examples in the past, as we are tonight, that these could be both natural upright logs, that are the snares, but then lower in the channels where you have more force and more power, they may be steel beams that are set up into the channels. And this might even be an opportunity for some public art. We also want to emphasize that long-term, there needs to be a focus on stream restoration. In terms of the priorities, the New Cut would be the first priority, the Tiber the second, and the Hudson the third. Again, to proactively keep debris out of the channel and restore sections of floodplain and stream where that's possible. With the news that we saw yesterday that the Wilkins Roger Mill site will be closing, there's an opportunity to perhaps explore a sensitivity analysis in the area of the Patapsco River. Looking at historic photos that we shared in a previous presentation, the mill site has been expanded over the years. The channel is encroaching on the channel. And so looking at a sensitivity analysis, not knowing what's going to happen with this site, but there's an opportunity to work with Baltimore County to explore, is there an opportunity to expand this floodplain in this area to maybe address some of the Patapsco River flooding. And that would have to be, we're not doing that study as part of this effort, but that's a recommendation that to work with the county to look at that. In terms of environmental sustainability, we've established several guidelines here. The first, uncover and restore streams that are piped below ground wherever practical, and we'll show some of those that we're talking about where they're currently culverted, where we see an opportunity to daylight them. When planning improvements, increase green space where possible. Employ permeable surfaces, including pavement and other green infrastructure wherever they could best achieve environmental goals. We've heard a lot in the online engagement about permeable pavement. One of the challenges in this watershed, especially in the core, is the granite bedrock, and permeable pavement's not going to work everywhere. But we certainly want to, where it can work, especially in the lower part of Main Street where there's more fluvial soils, maybe in Lot D where there is a broader floodplain at one point in time and the channel has changed course over the years, there may be some opportunities to do that. Increasing tree canopy wherever possible, aesthetically integrating environmental site design features into the surrounding landscapes, and not just treating these as engineering feats, but looking at how, where we do incorporate microbioretention, rain gardens, and other techniques, how could they really be incorporated into the landscape as an aesthetic feature as well as a functional one. And then using a variety of implementation techniques to protect and enhance the green infrastructure network along the Patapsco Riverfront. So just a number of things that we'll show where some of these might be applicable in some of the plans we're showing, but there are opportunities for green roof, permeable paving and bioretention, increasing tree canopy. We know EcoWorks and Lori Lilly are working with some, looking into biochar, the use of biochar to mix into the soil. And then green walls and pervium paving, some examples that have been done in Howard County. So we'll point out specifically where we see some opportunities. And then expanding the green network wherever we can. The green network that's shown is what's currently protected lands, steep slopes, floodplain, stream buffers along the tributaries. But how can this serve as a foundation then to expand that network? As we look at transportation and parking, for transportation, really supporting alternative ways of getting around, not just focusing on the car, but bicycle, shuttle, and really improving the walkability of Ellicott City, especially within the core, and connecting neighborhoods to the core. Making the experiences for pedestrians more enjoyable than they currently exist, and that includes ADA accessibility and more space to move around, more pedestrian area to navigate. Making the sidewalks more accessible, linking nearby neighborhoods to downtown with pedestrian and bicycle routes. That's something we heard a lot about over the past 2 years, especially for the neighborhoods that are on the outer edges of the watershed. And then when designing streetscape improvements, really enhancing visual and physical access to high ground as part of the safety and routes when there is a flash flood, very visible routes to the higher ground. So looking at the broader watershed, these are some, this is based on some input from over the past couple years in a series of meetings, but along Frederick Road, Old Columbia Pike, New Cut Road, and College Avenue, where there aren't sidewalk connections out to the further reaches of the watershed, really looking at how do we extend the sidewalks and pedestrian network out there. One, making the core more accessible to people that live in the neighborhoods, helping to eliminate the need for driving into the core, but also just improving, the health and livability of the neighborhoods. As we look at parking, we want to be comprehensive in the overall parking strategy and considering alternative ways. So not just think in terms of parking spaces and parking lots, but what are some of the other systems that support that parking management, the use of a shuttle, making the experience of walking from the parking areas more enjoyable so that people aren't moving their cars around so much. In the near term, restricting on-street parking where the flood risk is greatest, and then if on-street parking is restricted, accommodate those short-term needs with drop-off, loading, and delivery functions. Over time, locating most off-street parking out of flood-prone areas, and while the location of parking may change over time, planning for the overall parking supply to meet the typical demand. And then when new parking is being supplied, balance the number of spaces against other site opportunities and the surrounding character. So as we get into that, will make a little more sense as we get into some of the specific areas and looking at some of the alternative scenarios we have. But just looking at the parking network at a very broad scale, if we look at the core area, we have about 900 spaces existing in the core. The red areas are areas that are potential areas for reduced parking for a number of reasons. Along Lower Main Street, that reduction is that we still have the potential with safe and sound of over 3 feet of water in a flood like 2018 or 2016 in Lower Main. And through FEMA's research, 6 inches of water can get to the undercarriage of many passenger cars, stalling them out. 12 inches can float a car, and 2 feet of rushing water can move a car, even an SUV. So the county is very concerned about safety. There are a lot of issues with cars jamming the culverts and so forth. So really looking at some restrictions along Lower Main Street until flood mitigation can be in place. Lot B, that's going to be, and we'll talk more about this, is an area where we can, that's going to be offline for construction of the tunnel exit from the tunnel outfall in the Patapsco River. So we want to look at some potential loss there. The areas highlighted in green, particularly Lot A, Lot D, Lot F, and the courthouse, are really the areas where we have the ability to expand parking resources so that we can have an overall, not a net loss, but just the locations of parking resources may shift a bit. And we'll talk in more detail as we get into the area plan. So as part of the network, as part of this comprehensive plan, we're looking at a number of things. A shuttle, a lot of communities are doing a shuttle, and this can't look like the shuttle bus that goes to the local hospital or mobility transit. It has to be fun, something open, something contemporary. This is the top image is from Greenville, South Carolina. This is a privately run shuttle system that goes up and down their main street. And then at the bottom image, we're looking at how you can possibly even brand a shuttle here. And we heard a lot about building a funicular, and that may not be feasible here, but maybe the shuttle has a fun way of being branded the funicular for Ellicott City. Other things that we talk about, valet parking, and especially in this whole, the Uber trends that we're seeing, drop-off and pickup becomes more important than sometimes parking, but also having valet. The bottom left is in the Hamden neighborhood of Baltimore, where on weekends they implement valet parking. And then looking at some restricted parking on the signs that maybe in the flood-prone areas of Lower Main Street, it's loading and unloading. Perhaps there's a 15-minute limit for just convenience, run in and get a cup of coffee or pick up something. Maybe once flood mitigation's in place, We start with 2-hour restricted parking, and that may expand to paid parking for the most desirable spaces. And paid parking is a very important strategy for keeping turnover in the most desirable spaces. And that's something, we don't think it's the time now to implement that, but it's something long-term to look toward. Another part of the parking network is just signage, wayfinding signage, and communicating the message. And recognizing that Courthouse Hill was 300 steps up the hill to get to the parking. It's not convenient, so let's have a little bit of fun with it and branding that. But signage that shows that just a 15-minute walk away, there's more shops, and doing things in terms of minutes or even calories burned versus miles and distances. In terms of economic development, this all leads into economic development as well. We want to ensure, very importantly, that customer and visitor access to downtown businesses remain during construction. That we have some coordinated efforts to draw customers downtown during project construction. It's a very important effort that has to be coordinated. It's not going to happen by itself, but working with Ellicott City Partnership and the county, that could all be coordinated in using some of the branding to communicate those messages. Designing new buildings to accommodate the future expansions of successful buildings. We see this, or successful businesses. We see this in commercial districts all the time. A business, a mom and pop business, independent business might start out very small. They get very successful and need some larger spaces to move into. So how do we ensure that there's some larger spaces to keep those businesses in the district? To support a critical mass of activity, we want to primarily cluster the commercial uses along Main Street, primarily along Main Street. The courthouse property, when that's redeveloped, may have opportunities for a destination retail or boutique hotel or a restaurant use. We don't know what that is now, but it's really not going to be an extension of Main Street and the traditional shopping that you see on Main Street there. We want to protect and enhance Ellicott City's historic and distinctive character, and this needs to be viewed as intrinsic to the town's economic value. Ellicott City really is the region's, the county and the region's premier destination of independent shops. It really is an experience economy that you can't get elsewhere in the region. And then we want to support that and sustained investment in historic buildings, enhancing and celebrating downtown as an attractive place to live, shop, and work. I'm not going to get into the weeds of the economic development study, but we did a market study. Our team member, Arnett Muldrow, did this back in 2017 with zip code surveys, and it really revealed that over a two-week periods, we had 38 states plus DC, 4 foreign countries, 396 unique zip codes visiting the district, which really says that it's not just a local market, it really is a visitor destination. And then we've identified through that a primary and secondary trade areas. The primary trade areas where most of the visitation comes from, and that's the 2 zip codes of Ellicott City. The secondary is where maybe a third or more of the visits come from, and that's from the surrounding Catonsville, Columbia, Elkridge, and Woodstock areas. And just in a nutshell, some of the market findings, Tripp Muldrow updated this recently. So from 2017 to 2019, they found increased sales in the primary and secondary trade areas. However, consumer spending in these areas increased at an even greater rate. And the retail leakage is even greater than in 2017. And what that means is the primary and secondary trade areas, which go beyond the core, it's the whole Ellicott City area and some of the immediate surroundings, are leaking sales to other districts, Catonsville, Columbia, and you're never going to capture all the sales, but there is a significant leakage in certain categories. And those categories really include restaurants, both full service and limited service, furniture and home furnishings, specialty food stores and grocers, and pharmacies and drugstores. And so there's some pent-up demand for these, and there's an opportunity to capture some of that demand in Ellicott City. Now, it's not to say that if a business in one of these elements locates here, it's going to immediately be successful. There's obviously a number of factors. We know some of the businesses are struggling, but that's where the coordinated efforts, coordinating marketing comes into play, and there's a lot of things that go into making these successful, but these are the opportunities that exist. And especially in the food related, we see a lot of food halls and food markets happening in districts like this. They become real social meeting places, are very important for the district. We even see over in Catonsville the new grocer that's opening up in the downtown core. Looks like a gourmet grocer. Communicating the message that using the branding to communicate that the district is open during construction. And so again, this is just a sample, construction flags and shopping bags. So have some fun with it. They don't have to be a standard, closed for construction sign, but really play off it and make a concerted effort to market that and market the district. Also using some cooperative ads to really market the unique businesses here that you have, not only the businesses, but also the cultural attractions. This all goes into the economic development strategy to bring visitors in and to bring new complementary businesses in, as well as supporting the existing businesses. And then lastly, community character and placemaking. The series of guidelines here consider character-based development regulations such as form-based codes for the downtown and surrounding areas and corridors to better reflect the historic atmosphere. We have this wonderful historic gem in the core of Ellicott City, but we lose some of that. We don't really reflect that in some of the surrounding development. So how, as any infill occurs or in the future, how do we protect that along the corridors and in surrounding areas, any sites that are open for redevelopment, that there might be some form-based character codes developed into the general plan update to help better reflect the character. Including flexible outdoor spaces that can be used by the public for a variety of events and purposes. And as we get into the specific areas, we'll show a lot of how spaces can be flexible for a number of different uses depending on the time of day or the time of season. Integrating art where possible, providing interpretive signs and displays and features to increase awareness of the city's heritage, using signs and displays and features to increase awareness of Ellicott City's flood risk. Again, you could bring that to the forefront of the attention in creative ways. And interconnecting public outdoor spaces, parks, and open areas with a hierarchy of sidewalks and paths. We have a number of wonderful open spaces and cultural resources. There'll be even more as this plan is developed, and so collecting them into a network is going to be very important. As we begin to look at the corridors leading into the core, Frederick Road, Old Columbia Pike, Columbia, or College Avenue, these are areas where some character codes, character-based codes might be enforced. And then also in some key redevelopment sites. There's no intention to redevelop these now that we're aware of, but at Frederick and St. John's, the commercial district there in the lower left, and up at the Ridge Road Gateway District, if these sites ever are redeveloped, developing them in a different way that creates more walkable places and reflects the character of the district. Also looking at guidelines in the character codes that's starting to design buildings to fit the site rather than the site to fit the architecture. And so the examples on the left are two examples where, especially if you look at the core of Ellicott City, where buildings, four-story buildings, are built into the side of a hillside, one story in the back and four-story in the front. They're really, the buildings were adapting to the site that's uniquely Ellicott City, and that's what gives it its character. In conditions like the top left, we're taking a building that's designed for a flat site and putting on a hilly site, resulting in these retaining walls, versus the example on the right, which is a good example where the building is a two-story building set into the grade, taking advantage of that grade. So those are things that the character-based codes can start to get into to really look at the architecture to fit the sites. And then looking at, we talked about the open spaces. This shows in green a number of open spaces, and then both existing and potentially new ones, and cultural resources such as the Patapsco Female Institute, the Roger Carter site, the Barnard Fort House, and so forth, and then some of the new open spaces associated with the flood mitigation in Lower Main. And so these we need to look at the master plan to connect these comprehensively with the pathway and open space, a green network, so they become part of an overall network and not a bunch of individual sites. And then lastly, under character and community character and placemaking, we want to make sure that, you know, wherever we're making projects or implementing improvements, that we look at how we can make these great places to be, for people to be, activating them with the right uses, allowing events to occur, and taking advantage of the intrinsic qualities of these spaces. So with that, we wanted to have 10 minutes of Q&A on some of these topics, if anyone had any questions or comments on some of these broad guidelines. And again, this will keep these guidelines in mind as we go through the individual sites. Yes, ma'am.
Hold on.
Oh, Kristen's going to walk around with the...
Hold on. Testing.
Okay. I just wanted to comment that I strongly support the recommendations around increasing the sidewalk areas and shuttles and improving walkability. So we live in the historic district and walk everywhere, and would love to see more sidewalks on the courthouse road area.
Yes.
In addition to some of the Main Street areas. You talked about College Avenue, Old Columbia Pike, and Frederick Road. So I'm suggesting maybe above the courthouse too, because people do walk down from that area.
Yeah, and when we get into the courthouse site, we show that a little more. We have that as a guideline for when that's going out as an RFP, that's going to be an important consideration there. Thank you.
Anybody else?
All right, well, we will continue on. So now we're going to go into some of the specific areas as we look at. And this is a diagram that we had shared last year, and we've modified it a bit. But the darker red areas represent primarily county-owned property and opportunity sites. Most of these are surface parking lots, and they really, because they are owned by the county, they present a lot of opportunity that we could do things to them, whether it's improve the parking, improve the green space within them, or insert and incorporate other uses in them. Because they're county owned, that gives a lot more flexibility than if they were all privately owned. The pink shaded properties we have them highlighted because they're important publicly and privately owned cultural resources, like the Patapsco Female Institute, the Barnard Ford House, Mount Ida, Roger Carter Center, and they're all in very close proximity to these opportunity sites. So as we look at these opportunity sites, as RFPs go out for the courthouse property, or as changes occur with the tunnel in the Lot F area, we want to make sure that all of these are planned in context and understanding with these cultural resources, that we're not backing up to and creating barriers to these, but we're actually using some of these sites to create better connectivity among these different resources. And you'll see some of that as we move further down. The dashed areas represent significant private property opportunity sites should those current uses ever change. And we have the West End Auto Service site that we'll talk about in a little bit, and then the Wilkins Roger Mill, which is obviously in Baltimore County. And as we, I think a year ago, we didn't anticipate that that mill would be closing so soon. So we had always identified that as a far-off opportunity, but it's something that we need to keep on our radar right now. So we're going to go through each of these areas. We'll start with Streetscape and then start at the West End and work on down to the Riverfront. So with the Streetscape, some important guidelines that we want to have here is that we want to really design the streets and sidewalks and those associated pedestrian areas be simple, consistent, and authentic. And that's very important in the historic district, that they really are. They're not trying to be something that isn't Ellicott City, that they're consistent throughout and there's an authenticity about them. But we also want to use flood resilient materials and construction methods. So the timing of the streetscape with the flood mitigation projects becomes very important as to what the materials are and how they're constructed. We want to integrate visible and audible emergency alert systems into the design of the streetscapes. That's very important in conversations with the Office of Emergency Management, that there's these systems that are incorporated, that they're not add-ons, but they're really thoughtfully incorporated into the street system. And then we want to consider the potential impacts from storm debris in the design of streets, sidewalks, and the associated pedestrian areas. And so, how to, thinking about if storm debris comes down, how do some of these street elements keep them from going into the channels, or how are they anchored down so that they're not destroyed? This is a diagram that we had shared last year, looking, starting at the west end, expanding the sidewalks further along Frederick Road, improving some of the sidewalks. We heard a lot of a desire to rename this section of Frederick Road to Main Street, so it's a continuation of Main Street, and Frederick Road may start at 29 and going further. A traffic circle at Rogers Avenue to really create a boundary between coming in from the west, that you hit Rogers Avenue at the traffic circle, and at the west end you're entering a new district, having a series of bump outs and crosswalks along here, introducing a number of crosswalk or traffic calming techniques throughout the west end. That was something we probably heard most in our conversations with the residents of West End, is the desire to slow traffic down through there and make it safer for pedestrians and parked cars in that area. As we move further into the Main Street, again, continuing new sidewalk segments, and then showing areas in blue down in the core of areas on-street parking, drop-off, and delivery, introducing several mid-block crosswalks and better crosswalks at some of the intersections within the core, and then some new curb bump outs. And we'll show more details of this as we get further into the planning. Oops. Go back. In the West End, this was a sketch we had last year that hasn't really changed, looking at opportunities to create some bump outs, some raised crossings, crosswalks, create some safer parking zones, and then looking at alternating some of the parking areas. There might be some areas where you could do it on both sides of the street, but in most cases it's probably going to be alternating because of the width of the street there. As we look at the core, historically there's really kind of a very simple geometry to the street in Main Street. There is the sidewalk zone, the parking zone, and then the travel lane zone. And we want to, as we look at streetscape improvements, especially as we start to talk about bump outs and curb extensions, we want to try and respect this simplicity here and not have a streetscape that visually is going in and out and kind of loses that simple geometry there. So these are just very simple diagrams showing how if we do introduce bump outs, you can see the curb line introduced there, that the sidewalk materials may reflect either what's happening in that the drop-off or parking lane, or the parking drop-off lane could match what the sidewalk materials are. We'll show that in the next couple slides. This is a, excuse me. This is a more detailed plan showing that before flood mitigation, we're really continuing to recommend the use of scored concrete with granite curb to really withstand as they are more resilient to the flood waters than the brick. So any streetscape that's done before flood, before the safe and sound, recommend concrete. But this is an example showing how the bump outs and extended bump outs could be used to create some outdoor amenity space, some seating areas, and then define some of those drop-off, pickup, and valet areas. And then the paving of that drop-off zone might reflect the paving of the sidewalk area so that we maintain that simple visual geometry along the side. Now, post safe and sound flood mitigation, the shear stresses would be reduced down enough that we could look at brick sidewalks, reintroducing the brick sidewalks, and that could even extend into this valet pickup and delivery area, or it could just be occurring along the sidewalk area as the shear stresses would be lower, and we could do that. So this is just an example of how some of those bump out areas could be incorporated into the streetscape without getting a very busy in and out of, a visual in and out of the curb line moving back and forth. And then some photographs. The top left is Lynchburg, Virginia. This is an area where that drop-off zone is used in, paved in brick that continues the character of the sidewalk and visually narrows the street and visually expands the sidewalk area. And then we have some in his other historic areas of concrete sidewalks with granite curb and gutter. The map on the top right shows where we'd recommend granite curb. Now, currently, there's all concrete curb and gutter along Main Street in the core. It's in very good condition. So this is really looking at a long-term recommendation, or if large sections of the streetscape are redone, that granite curb can be implemented at that point. But this and then any recommendations for brick are really more of a longer term. And then the bottom diagram with the red shows where we're recommending some mid-block crossings along Main Street, and there might be some bump-out curb extensions to make for safer pedestrian crossings. In a cross-section, we talked a lot at the last time about doing these flexible zones where the drop-off area could be brought up to street level and bollards separating them from the sidewalk area, so that most of the time this is a drop-off zone, but then some of the time during special events it's an expanded expanded sidewalk area. We think the best area to do this would be at Lower Main, where with the buildings, the 4 buildings coming down on the south side of Main Street, that there's an opportunity to shift the curb line a little bit so that we could get this drop-off zone to be 12 to 13 feet wide, and that would be adequate distance so you're not stepping out onto the rolled curb. So that would be Lower Main, where we see this concept working best. We also see the opportunity at Maryland Avenue with the pull-in parking spaces to bring them up to street level, so that most of the time it functions as it does today with pull-in parking and 2 drive lanes. But then during special events you could close that parking area and it essentially becomes expanded gathering and event area. We're also showing to the right here, with the introduction of the Maryland Avenue culverts as part of the Safe and Sound Plan, the opportunity to cantilever over that part of the channel by about 20 or 15 to 20 feet to expand the usable sidewalk area there. And so this is something that an opportunity to explore as the culvert design is being developed to make sure it is feasible. But we want to, while the tunnel team and the culvert design team is design work is underway, we want to make sure this is an opportunity that is looked at. We talked earlier about how flood mitigation can accomplish multiple goals, and so while we're building these culverts, how can we increase some of the pedestrian gathering space? This is some examples of other communities where this kind of multi-flex space on the sidewalk and parking zones that work for both parking and pedestrians. And this, again, an example for Maryland Avenue and some of those areas along Lower Main. As we look at the West End, we already talked about considering the extension of Main Street through the West End, and really looking at it as an extension of Main Street for streetscape planning, incorporating traffic calming into the streetscape improvements throughout the West End, and then planning for long-term opportunities related to the West End service property should the current use change. We don't know of any plans to change that use now, but the master plan, this is a long-term plan, so we want to put some frameworks in place should that use ever change. And we look at this, we've scaled back from what we were showing last year in the master plan that showed more of an illustrative detail, and we zeroed down to what are some of the most important elements that if this property ever were to change. And some of those include restoring the floodplain area where the current West End service building is located, creating more green space and restoring that floodplain, creating a green network and connection to other amenities such as the Roger Carter Center and to that broader pedestrian network, and then looking at some of the appropriate sites for new uses that are really integrated with the surrounding neighborhoods. And then some of the existing service buildings might even be able to be reused as maker space, and this is something that we talked about last year as well. Some of these buildings could become maker space and really become a center focus for the West End. As we move further to the east, the Ellicott Mills Gateway area, which is Lot G, the Bernard Fort House, and Lot F. This is where we start to get into the meat of some of the safe and sound improvements related to the tunnel entrance. And we want to make sure the tunnel entrance is seamlessly blend with its surroundings as much as possible. The tunnel entrance needs to be designed to minimize risks to people. And then I should note that the tunnel design team is currently working with the county in developing that. So we've been working with them to understand at this point, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we have a general idea of where it would be located and the size, the area that's required, so that we're able to incorporate that into our planning purposes. But the details are still being developed. When planning any new structures near parking lot F that we need to consider and reduce the potential visual impacts of the Bernard Fort House and the Heritage Center, we need to use sidewalks and paths to interconnect parking areas with heritage resources, including the Bernard Fort House and the Thomas Isaac log cabin. And then we want to design the surrounding area of the log cabin as an integral part of the gateway entrance to Ellicott City. And then coordinating plans for parking lots G with lots F and D. If you remember that diagram we have with the red and green dots over all the parking areas, if we reduce the parking in one area, we may have to increase it in another. So we want to look at these areas in concert with each other. So as we look at Ellicott Mills and Lot F and Lot G, I'm going to zoom in on some of these areas in more detail, but at a high level, the area down at the bottom that's shaded, the trapezoid, that's the tunnel entrance area. That's roughly where it would be located and roughly the size of the area that might be needed for that to occur. So we wanted to show that in context with some other parameters. Potential, in this case, this is looking at a parking deck to occur in there, and depending on whether that's 2 or 3 levels, could accommodate anywhere from 165 to 250 spaces. An important aspect is this: to the right of that, where we have the existing stream channel, we want to be able to expand and restore that stream channel and create pedestrian connectivity from Court Avenue up to the Bernard Fort House. So however that tunnel entrance is designed, we want to maintain pedestrian connectivity up through there. On scheme A1, we're also showing this deck is built roughly on the footprint of the existing, or the west edge is roughly on the footprint of the surface parking lot now, so it's preserving the trees along Ellicott Mills Drive. That setback would allow in the future, there's the future to add some active uses along that garage face, so that you have more active uses along the street versus a parking garage. You know, when we talk about introducing new uses, it's not just about creating development for the sake of development, but it's also, as we want to reinforce this as a walkable community, having active uses along the street edge is an important part to make it more walkable. And then we looked at another scheme, Scheme B, where if we shifted that deck closer to Ellicott Mills Drive, the opportunity, that gives us an opportunity to create a wider expanded stream restoration for that tributary that comes down on the east side of the parking lot F. So we have a little more room there, opening up more connection to the Bernard Fort House. And then Scheme C actually shows us a single bay terrace. It has an upper deck and a lower deck built into the hillside with surface parking over the remaining of the parking lot, and that really maximizes the view corridor to the Bernard Fort House. That results in less parking spaces, so in that scheme we'd probably want to keep more permanent parking in Lot G. and I'll go into each of those in detail. So this is zooming in onto one of the parking deck schemes, showing how, sorry, we shifted the plan, so now north is to the left. But you can see the tunnel entrance area. The tunnel entrance area would be designed that we would maintain the base flow of the stream through there, and then this would be the entrance in the tunnel, and a portion of this would be covered. It would go underground, but those designs need to be worked out. You can see the pedestrian connection we want to maintain to Court Avenue, the area for some stormwater stream restoration along the east side of parking lot F. And then one of the ideas that came out of the online engagement was, incorporating an amphitheater onto the hillside in the Bernard Ford House grounds. We thought that was a great idea. We're showing that. We talked with Rec and Parks about this idea, and they really liked that idea as well. As we move up to Lot G, this is an alternative that shows all of this as park space. There's a significant part of this natural drainage channel, or the drainage channel that's there now, is culverted and it's underground. We're proposing that whatever happens in Lot G, that we daylight that, restore that channel, and then there's an opportunity to introduce a more natural landscape, meadow, more tree canopy in there, and then keeping some usable park space toward the northern end of that lot, and maybe a gateway park at the southern end. Again, these are master plan concepts. When this becomes a real project, the details would need to be worked out in the design. But then this is a scheme that if we did keep parking in this lot, I talked earlier about trying to keep multi-use for some of these spaces. So the parking lot could be designed as a parking lot most of the time, but park and event space some of the time. There might be an opportunity for the spaces themselves to be permeable paving. There could be some demonstration projects that occur here. And then planting the trees in an arrangement that creates outdoor rooms with this parking lot, so that, again, you could keep the smaller portion of the parking for parking and close off the larger portion for an event, and still have some park space around the perimeter. We're still showing opportunity to daylight that stream channel, naturalize that channel, and introduce more tree canopy and meadow and pollinator planting along that edge. As we move to Lot D in the upper main area, we want to look at, when redesigning parking Lot D, to really incorporate some environmental site design features as much as possible, such as microbiome retention and more canopy, more green space. If expanding and naturalizing the existing stream channel in Lot D, we want to design that expanded channel to really serve as a public park and gathering space. So how can it really be a real amenity and leverage other benefits to the master plan? Any structures, new structures that occur in Lot D, we want to minimize the impacts to the overall quality and flexibility of that space. We want to consider views and vistas in the design and enhancements to Lot D, and we want to allow and accommodate for public events and celebrations to continue. They might not occur exactly the way they occur now, but we want to make sure they can be accommodated in the future. We want to maximize the number of parking spaces in Lot D, as this is really a centrally located parking lot, but we also want to balance those with other requirements in Lot D. We want to phase those changes in Lot D to be flexible to avoid, so whatever we do in the short term, we want to make sure we don't preclude future opportunities. One of the things we heard a lot in the online engagement was, creating more opportunities for green and naturalized channels. They're really in the core of Ellicott City. There's not a lot of opportunity to do this unless we restore the floodplains as well. To restore the floodplains, we'd need to take down a lot of historic buildings to do that. So a lot of these channels need to be hard surface with the floodwaters, the velocities, the shear stress that come in here. However, we have identified some areas where we could do more of a naturalized channel. Lot G, I already talked about that area where we could daylight that channel through there. Lot F, to the east of the parking lot, we can enhance that stream channel. And then the area of the Hudson below the tunnel entrance to Court Avenue, because the floodwaters would be diverted to the tunnel, that area of the channel could be naturalized more as well. And then there's also an opportunity in Lot D, provided we introduce a diversion culvert for the Tiber to tie into the Hudson further south of, further to the east of Lot D, and that would allow a good section of any daylighted channel in Lot D to be naturalizing green, because we'd be diverting the stress of the floodwaters. So we've looked at a number of options in Lot D. Certainly, since Lot D is no longer required for the flood mitigation solutions, these are probably much longer term concepts than what we were showing a year ago. But on the left is the existing conditions, and that's certainly an option to leave parking Lot D as it is and exists with the number of spaces. Scheme A shows keeping it as a surface lot, reorganizing it, introducing more tree islands, more tree canopy, and then widening that channel and introducing a green amenity channel through there. And I'll zoom in on some of these too in the next couple slides. That certainly has an implication, though, with number of parking spaces. So we would lose parking spaces in that and need to pick them up somewhere else, whether it's Lot F or Lot A or the courthouse lot. And then Scheme A1 is really, another reorganization of surface and introducing some bioretention that could also become an amenity for that space as well. And then Schemes B and B1 showing the ability for future parking structure. We'd still encourage that if there is a parking structure there, wrapping it with some active uses, especially if we're going to invest in making the stream channel an amenity area. That amenity adds value to that any uses along there, but more importantly, those uses, restaurant uses or other uses, would help activate that amenity and really add value to the amenity itself by putting people there and overlooking that. And then this parking, last year when we showed this, we showed solar panels on the deck. It could certainly have a green roof on it. It could be a 3-level deck with a green roof or a 4-level deck with solar panels. So there's several options. Again, we're not getting into the detailed design of this, but we think there should be the flexibility maintained for this, especially once the tunnel is implemented. The actual floodplain in Lot D, the floodplain limits would likely change, so increasing the usable area for this lot. So this is just zooming in on one of the surface parking schemes that introduces some bioretention. It also shows how the channel can be widened. This is a channel that is mostly naturalized. We could introduce a lot of plant material in green because we wouldn't have the floodwaters coming in here. And it's a little hard to see, but the dashed line shows the potential diversion for the Tiber that would run parallel to this and then tie in just underneath the road crossing into Lot D. And then this is just a scheme that shows, and these are this shows the activated channel. This isn't mutually exclusive with the development in Lot D, but showing because we don't have the floodwaters in this channel, this is a channel that we could safely allow people to get down into and interact and engage with the water. And so there could be some ramps down there. It could still be mostly green, but providing some opportunity there. But we think that with some, if there is a parking deck added here and wrapped with some active uses, this could really serve as an amenity feature, and that activity could help really activate that open space. That would be an investment. We're recommending a parking structure be set back to the rear of the lot as much as possible to preserve as much of that open space as possible, still allow events, and still allow that open spatial quality that we have in Lot D. This is a slightly modified sketch that we had from before, no longer showing any changes to Lot E. We're showing the green roof on the deck. Again, this is looking at maybe 3-story wrapped uses around a deck, but showing that activated channel and how the two could work together and leverage each other. This could be a smaller deck, it could be a smaller footprint, the uses could be different, but this is just a conceptual plan that we're recommending leave the flexibility for this to happen in the future. These are all examples of new development in historic communities, so whatever that wrapped use take, we're not designing it now, but whatever form it takes, it should be sensitive and fit into the scale and quality of Ellicott City. As we move up to Courthouse Hill, this really hasn't changed since last year, but some guidelines, and this reflects on one of the things that you talked about earlier, ma'am. We want to incorporate in the redevelopment a mix of uses that complement and support Main Street businesses in the adjacent historic attractions. So really be complementary to what's happening along Main Street and then Mount Ida, the Patapsco-Femo Institute, and the Bernard Ford House. Through site design, we really want to establish an interconnected street and pedestrian networks that provide clear connections to Main Street and those resources that surround this site. We want to enhance the visual and physical connections to Mount Ida and the Patapsco-Femo Institute. And then we want to disguise and wrap any parking structures that occur there with some active uses. And we also want to make sure there's a public parking component incorporated in there too. So these are a series of guidelines that when the county issues an RFP for this site, these guidelines would go into that RFP. And then just example, these have not changed since the past year, but showing how any redevelopment could occur, but creating a clear street network that connects. There might even, if there is a parking structure associated with here, or a building using some of those upper levels to maybe bridge over to create a connection to the Patapsco-Femo Institute at that upper level and make that more accessible, and then giving more of a front door presence for Mount Ida. As we move to Lower Main, we're probably going to see most of the changes in the plan. We want to look at a couple of things here. We want to restrict public access to the channel to minimize risks to people, again emphasizing safety. This is a much smaller space now, and since we have the opportunity to safely engage with the channel in Lot D, we want to really maximize the pedestrian area up above the channel in Lower Main and not provide that access to people in the channel. We want to design the stream channel, culverts, and surrounding space to really serve as a focal point, inviting people to view the Tiber, and also a focal point to the B&O Railroad Museum. We want to incorporate historic building elements in the design and stream channel, the culverts, and the surrounding space to the extent practical and to the extent that they can be protected from damage. We're not going to determine what all those are now, but we want to lay the groundwork for that to occur. We want to use materials and design that's compatible with the historic channels and their surroundings, maximize views to the B&O Railroad Museum, and really be able to accommodate various events and celebrations and look at these as multifunctional public spaces, and then provide access to high ground wherever possible. So this is a plan view scheme we're looking at. So to the right is the lower channel at Maryland and Main Street. This is where the four buildings are planned to come down. This is the channel design or the channel dimensions that we've received from McCormick Taylor. You can see with the umbrella tables and the area that extends over the Maryland Avenue culvert entrances to expand the outdoor gathering area off of Maryland Avenue. And then to the left of the diagram, Kaplan's building, there's some existing beams and a rear brick wall that's on the other side of the channel that are potentially could be preserved. So incorporating those features, and then incorporating a upper level deck and pedestrian access to allow access from the upper floors across the channel to St. Paul Street. The county owns land leading up to St. Paul Street, so that could almost become a St. Paul Terrace Park, that introduces some trees and green space, but also a ramp and access system up to higher ground. We have some sketches that will show this in more detail. Again, this is the diagram we showed earlier of Maryland Avenue, showing how that expanded sidewalk area could be used, and then a potential expansion over the culvert entrance at Maryland Avenue, if that's feasible with the tunnel design or the culvert design. Looking at a perspective view, this is the same view angle we had last year, but showing the remaining buildings and the buildings that would be sliced off. So you could see with the Kaplan's building, the beams that would come over across the channel at the second level. This is a little deceiving. It looks like they're a lot lower than they are. They would be at the second level, showing some outdoor balcony space along there. Also the bridge access along the upper stories of Shoemaker, Kaplan's, and the other buildings to that terraced park on St. Paul Street. And then the lower end of the channel showing some terrace steps, but not accessible down to the channel, but that would break up. That's about probably a 13, 14-foot high wall channel depth there, so breaking up that sheer drop with some terraces for visual interest. So zooming in on the St. Paul Terrace Park, you could get a better idea of the upper level decks and the terrace walls, how that can become an amenity leading up to St. Paul. And then the rear facades are going to obviously be very important in how they're treated. As we look at the lower part of Main Street, again, a better sense of terraces. We would like to get in a pedestrian bridge crossing there, roughly where Tiber Alley comes across right now. Likely it would have to be elevated 14 feet above the channel basin to allow floodwaters underneath. So we're not sure. It may or may not be able to have ADA accessible ramps up to there. That has to be looked at. That would certainly be encouraged, but it may not be possible. And then you get a better sense of some of the outdoor gathering area off of Maryland Avenue. And then some of the areas, this is the upper left image is the St. Paul Terrace Park area. So it's quite a nice space. It could become an amenity as well as an emergency access to St. Paul. And then some examples from other communities of some terraced gathering spaces that lead down to the channel. So making as much as we can of that space. And then the bottom is already an existing image of the channel bottom, and would recommend using some of these textures, cobbles mortared in place for some of the channel bottoms, so it's not just concrete and looking like the LA River. This is another view looking from the north across to the lower Main area and the terraces and the Terrace Park access. I'll zoom in. This view, one of the things you could see a ramp on the top left that comes down parallel to Tiber Alley. This is actually for vehicles to access the channel for debris removal. So this would be closed off to pedestrians. Probably need to show a gate in there at the top. But the idea is that we want to provide some access for vehicles to get down there to remove debris from the channel to keep that clear. And then you get a sense of some of how Tiber Alley becomes more gathering space, and those buildings along there all of a sudden have very visible facades to Main Street. This is a view, this is kind of a modified view what we showed last year, but obviously with the 5 additional buildings in place. These are the upper floors of Shoemaker's building that span the channel. The first floor that spans the channel would be removed, and then the back halves of the buildings, Kaplan's and the other buildings, would be removed as well. And then that building that wall for Shoemakers has to be rebuilt. So we're really recommending that windows be incorporated into that facade. It's going to be a very highly visible facade. So make that a very attractive element. It's going to be very important. But you get a sense of the use of stone for these channel walls, the terraces, the fence, and then the bridge crossing that you see here. And then this is the inset is the previous view when the 9 buildings were going to be removed, so you get a sense. It's actually a much more manageable scale of an open space with the 4 buildings removed, and so we don't feel like access to that channel and that space is as critical as it maybe was before when it was much larger. And then those facades, we also understand that there's an opportunity, we're not showing it, but the back side of the wall, there's an opportunity to put some higher windows on those first floors where we have the flood wall, so that we'll be looking at that. Again, this is a conceptual illustration. It's not the actual design, but it starts to illustrate some opportunities that we have for this area. Also, with the removal of these lower 4 buildings on Lower Main, it really creates an opportunity to give more visibility to the B&O Railroad Museum. So this is a sketch showing some of the bump out areas to make some of the sidewalks where they're the most narrow, more accessible, but showing the opportunity for some expanded sidewalk on the south side of Main Street. Maybe introducing a couple trees. We probably want to protect these with some bollards so that they're protected from storm debris. But it really does show how the B&O Railroad Museum can have a much stronger presence on Main Street, and then you get a sense of some of the broader gathering areas for outdoor dining as well as for fairs and events. And then, as we talked about before, we're not going to prescribe what these are, but there should be opportunities for historic interpretation, whether it's salvaging some remnant foundation walls or marking lines in the channel where foundation walls once were to give a sense of history. The middle slide shows how Boulder, Colorado brought awareness to their flood, that they're in a flood zone. These blue dots represent the high floodwater potential. So it's a kind of a creative, artistic way to show that you're in a flood district. And lastly, as we move to the riverfront, we're going to look at a number of guidelines here. This is the other end of the tunnel, so the tunnel outfall needs to seamlessly blend with its surroundings. We want to minimize the risk to people at the tunnel outfall. We also want to enhance views to the Patapsco River and the B&O Railroad Museum for visitors as they approach Ellicott City from Baltimore County. Providing safe and inviting pedestrian and bicycle access between Baltimore County and Ellicott City. If building a new pedestrian bicycle bridge across the river, this bridge really should be an attraction in and of itself. It should have a signature design that best reflects its context, but it should really be an attraction that makes crossing that river a fun, enjoyable experience. If building a parking structure in Lot A, we're going to allow a direct connection to the trolley line and the trolley number 9 trail. We want to maximize accessible riverfront park space. This is the only area, Lot B is the only area where you could get to the river from the Ellicott City side. You're not cut off by the railroad. And then we want to look at parking Lot B as how could it be, if it remains parking, how can it be a multi-use parking and park space. So this is the area of the river. It's actually quite beautiful. The water was fairly low here. A lot of people were using it. This is the area where generally where the tunnel outfall might occur, a series of rock walls and rock outcrops. So engineering that's going to be quite a challenge. As we go to the plan view, this is showing if there were a parking deck in Lot A, the potential for 3 to 4 levels, opportunity that has a direct connection to the trolley line trail. This is showing a new pedestrian bike bridge across the Patapsco that would land at the lower Main Street area. We're showing in the blue shaded area is the approximate tunnel outfall location. This exact location is still being determined, but it would be somewhere north of parking lot B. And then parking lot B would be really critical for the construction staging and the construction of that tunnel outfall. We're showing parking lot B. If a deck is constructed in lot A, there may be the potential to convert a good bit of parking lot B to a park space, a riverfront park that's a real signature on the Patapsco. that includes combination of soft and hard surfaces that are permeable. There's already permeable parking spaces there now, perhaps in addition of a boardwalk. Some of the other things that we want to identify here are that we heard a lot in earlier meetings was opening up views to the B&O Railroad Museum. So there might be an area on that hillside in front of the museum to limb up some of the existing trees there, not remove them, but limb them up to open up some of the views. The same with at the gateway coming in from Baltimore County at the Oella Park. There's some fairly dense river birch at that sign, limbing them up to open up views to the river and make that river and B&O Railroad Museum part of the identity for Ellicott City and part of the gateway experience. A scaled back alternative is if parking lot A were to remain surface parking, would still want to provide some ADA ramp up to the trolley line trail. But then also the other thing that's being looked at is rather than a new separate pedestrian bike bridge, looking at how can the existing Main Street bridge be enhanced, whether it's the existing sidewalks and lane configuration, or is there a bridge attached to that structure that's a separate bike and pedestrian bridge. So that's something that's being explored right now in the county. And then this is showing the parking lot remaining as a parking lot, but again designed as a flexible space. So this is an aerial photograph showing this shows the parking deck in Lot A, the new potential new bike and pedestrian bridge, some improvements to Lot B as a flexible park and parking lot area, and then zooming in on some of that potential too. So especially if there would be a major parking resource in parking lot A, that experience of getting from parking lot A to Main Street is going to be very critical, that it's an enjoyable experience. And that bridge really should be an attraction in and of itself. Oops. To the right are some historic images of the trolley bridge that was there. We don't feel like trying to recreate that exactly as the approach to go, but there might be a contemporary interpretation of that and some examples. Again, we're not designing the bridge right now, but some examples here of a truss bridge and in a more contemporary interpretation. And the bridge should be an attraction, excuse me, in and of itself. So that was a lot of information to go through. Our next steps is that this presentation will be put online. There'll be a survey and online component developed for this. The county has not developed that yet. We don't have the details of it, so stay tuned on the website for more information on that. Then we'll go into draft plan preparation after we get the comments back on this presentation, and then there'll be a draft open house sometime in the winter. So with that, more Q&A. So thank you very much. Kristen will roam around again. Thank you.
On the tunnel construction, when do you think you're going to go out for bid?
I really can't answer that. I don't know if Mark has any sense yet with that.
Well, first we're going to pre-qualify firms. I think it's not on.
Testing.
And after we pre-qualify firms, then we'll put a request for a proposal together and then evaluate that. So we're not exactly sure how long that process would be, but it could be as much as a year from now before we would have put out for a request for a proposal and have something submitted back to us.
Another hand over in this area. Testing.
I have a question about maintenance of the channel at Main Street. Why doesn't it get cleaned out?
I'm sorry?
It is full of debris from past hurricanes, big rocks, pieces of concrete, an enormous pile of rocks where New Cut Creek and the Tiber come together.
In,
At the T on the Tiber, there's a layer of sediment in the channel, like 6, 8, 10 feet thick. I don't know, but why doesn't it get cleaned out?
well, I know that the county and EcoWorks together are working on, they do clear out after a storm event right now. They are doing more cleanup of the channels. And then part of the long-term plan is that there's debris catchment further up each of these channels in the watershed to keep some of that from coming down. And I don't know if, again, Mark can elaborate on that.
So the debris that you see at the confluence of the New Cut and the Tiber, and I think that's what you're talking about, that's, we just had our pre-construction meeting to reconstruct the stream banks on the New Cut. And as part of that contract, they'll be cleaning that portion of the stream out. And the other idea of other portions of the Tiber or the Hudson to get rid of some of the sediment deposits that have been placed there, that's something that we see is happening further down the line, and working with MDE and the Corps of Engineers to see what the feasibility is. Well, I think that part of the sediments and rock that you see come from the upper channels of things falling apart, especially, for example, in the New Cut. We didn't really lose very many walls at all. There aren't a lot of walls up there, but it did transport all the way down to the confluence where the velocities dropped and it just settled down. So I think that by cleaning that out and by maintaining the channels, that it would eventually rid us of a lot of the debris that collects during storms. Right.
All right, I'm going to move over here this way. Anybody have any?
We're going to make sure we alternate back and forth so you get a lot of exercise, Kristen.
Testing, testing. Okay.
Holding. Like you, I surprised how quickly the Wilkins and Rogers presented itself. So you didn't put in how that should be in the interim, at least for parking. It's probably, I was guessing, 100 to 200 spaces just in their parking lot. So how do we get that until somebody redevelops it? I also found, researching the last few days, that there's a 3/4 acre parcel that they own in Howard County that goes from their train spur, and it's adjacent to a couple pieces of state parkland. So not sure how accessible or usable that is, but there is that bridge and that little park space there.
And where is that?
From the Wilkins and Rogers building. So how do we get access to that and coordinate with Baltimore County and deal with the parking? In the interim, I think you should deal with getting the county control of the parking until that, if it becomes vacant, until it gets redeveloped.
Yeah, and as you said, again, this was all breaking news yesterday, so it's certainly something that before was looked at as a long-term strategy, that we knew someday that mill would probably go away, and we'd have to look at that property as a real opportunity, interim uses, but also long-term uses. But certainly, I think there should be discussions with the Baltimore County and Howard County on what the timing of this is, and then what some of those opportunities are.
All right, just so you didn't include the park spaces apparently there because it's inaccessible because the CSX Railroad is cutting off the state
That's
parkland.
right.
Second question, dealing with the 3 Maryland culverts, the engineers don't think you need some terracing and breakwater or strainers to keep the debris in the vehicles from clogging up the channels there?
So at the 2 culverts under so those are being designed right now. So I think that design element's going. For keeping debris out, we want to make sure we keep debris out before it even gets into the core of Ellicott City, and that's where some of the debris snares further up in the channels are going to be really important to keep it out before they're also keeping parked cars off of Lower Main Street, and then having some the fencing up along the walls of the channel durable fencing that keeps debris from going into the channel is going to be important as well. The actual entrance to those culverts is still being designed by that design team that we're not involved in, so we'll be looking at that.
How much flow do you expect to see in the lower channel there most of the time?
I mean, most of the time it's probably what you would see right now. I think I know they're still looking at how much flow is diverted into the tunnel and how much, but keeping some base flow in there. So I think what you typically see today is what would remain, and there'll be kind of a low weir that once water gets to a certain elevation in the lower main channel, it would be diverted into the culverts under Main Street. But most of the time, it's going to be going into the existing culvert under Maryland Avenue.
Hi, I'm one of the 11 homeowners on Fells Lane, so I'm really sensitive to when you call it temporary Lot G, and then you started just calling it Lot G. So I know it depends on which plan, but it seemed like it started to be not temporary anymore. And also, like, in some of those, it looked like Fells Lane just stops and it doesn't go, like, if things are built, it looks like our street just ends.
No, it
Okay.
doesn't. So that was probably just in the drawing where we focused. But on Fells Lane, so I think previously, we were looking at the parking on Lot G as temporary, and that still might be the case, but I think we need to look at it, too, as the potential that it be a permanent situation. And if it is permanent, what we're recommending is that it really be designed as an intentional amenity space, that it has a design to it, incorporates some permeable paving. It's designed that could be also a multi-purpose park and event space as well, and not just an asphalt lot.
Hello.
Hi.
I think the concept, the whole finished plan is wonderful, but I'm just thinking of 20 years. And do you have a critical path for the flood mitigation? When is the demolitions, the culverts? When is business going to stop and start? Have you thought? Is there a timeline?
The safe and sound we know is like a 5 to 7 year time frame, and I guess five-year time frame. So most that's going to occur first. That's going to be the first thing that occurs here, versus some of the other master plan elements that we show that are separate from the safe and sound would be likely after that. But in terms of when the demolition is going to occur, I don't know if anyone can answer that back there. We don't have that information.
Okay. So that process runs through the federal government, through the Army Corps of Engineers. We have urged them to move as quickly as possible. We can't do any demolition until we get the approval. We have submitted our application, so that process is underway, and we're just going to continue to push them on their timeline. But it's moving along.
All right, we had a question over here.
A couple of previous questions remind me of this. In your conceptual level now, what hydraulic reality sort of attaches to those visions of Lower Main? If the last year's storm hit that concept, would you have a couple of feet of water in Main Street? Would you have nothing? Would you have?
I believe
what's your idea now?
if you had the same storm, you still have maybe 3 to 4 feet in Lower Main with the same type of flood, but that's low enough. The velocity would certainly be less than what you had, and that gives the ability to flood-proof some of those buildings. Now, of course, this is top-down storm, not a Patapsco River storm. But
you talked about moving people to higher ground, but is there someplace I didn't see any buildings where they could go for safety or be out of the rain? Is there anything in your concept?
Well,
the
5 buildings on Lower Main that are remaining that the county now owns, I think there may be some opportunity to incorporate some stairs or elevator in some of those buildings. I think that still needs to all be worked out. But we have the off the second floor, the rear access ramps and bridges that would you'd be, if you were on the upper floors, be able to leave those buildings and get across the channel to St. Paul. I believe the county is also working with property owners on the north side of Main Street that have stair access going up to the hillside, like that are private access points, but would be open, a way to have them available and open for people to access the north side of Main Street and higher ground from that side as well. Well, we want to get them out of that low area. I mean, the key is to get them out of the low area. So, so a covered area. Really, I mean, there could be some pavilions down there. There might be in the lower main area some cover for a regular rain if you have this as an event space. But for a shelter and a flood event, we wouldn't have that.
Hi. My question might go back to the first half of your presentation about overall goals for the master plan. My concern is that 20 years is a long time and that there should be some guidelines in the overall master plan about not increasing any amount of flooding or any degradation of water quality over time, and I realize that's crossing a little bit of a boundary between master planning and regulatory, but I think that's an important master planning concept to maintain for the long-term development.
Yeah, and I think, and actually with some of the environmental sustainability guidelines in the plan, those are certainly geared towards water quality and the bioretention, and permeable paving improves water. It's not going to stop the flooding, but it will improve the water quality. So I think we can, we're still working on the language, and when we have the draft plan, we'll have more detail to each of these guidelines and goals as well. So thank you.
What is your overall goal for parking count in terms of your master plan? Where do you think you need to be in terms of parking between these different lots?
We know from the parking studies that were done, the Desmond study that was done several years ago, that there really is, right now there is sufficient parking in the core. It's just not sufficiently distributed. So we obviously have, some very high demand areas that on weekends and evenings are there's a deficit of parking, but other areas there's a surplus of parking. So we're trying to maintain at least what we have now, about the 900 spaces in the core area, and using that as a balance standpoint. Now we need to see when the courthouse leaves, that may change that number a little bit. It might go lower, but we also want to be able to accommodate for any new uses that come into the district as well. So as a starting off point, we're trying to maintain 900 spaces and then focus on some management techniques to better wayfinding to the parking resources, the shuttle, especially when some parking is offline for some of these construction projects like Lot F and Lot B. Not necessarily at the same time, but when the tunnel's being constructed, those would be offline. Yes.
Testing.
From the other end. This isn't really a design question. It's more of just how government works. So hopefully there's somebody who can answer this. Is there a mechanism that can be in place that would preserve the plan, since it's a long-range plan, with new administrations? What would the disruption, what would protect it from disruption or from just being stopped? Or, I mean, how does that work, or does it?
Yeah, well, and maybe someone from the county could answer. This would be adopted. This plan would be adopted and incorporated into the county's general plan. So it would be the guy officially, I don't know what the language is, but it would be the official guiding document for the master plan, because it would be incorporated into the general plan. Yes, through a process. And there is when I have a certain amount of flexibility built into the master plan, and that's where a lot of the guidelines come in place, that they establish an overall framework, but there's market forces, other things that come into play that you can't anticipate right now. So you want to have some flexibility built into it, but still holding true to the guidelines and the overall goals and vision.
It looks like a lot of this plan involves Baltimore County, so how closely have you been working with them, and what's your support look like over there?
Yeah, we've had meetings, and not in the past year, but when we started off this process, we've met with Baltimore County. Right now, Howard County operates the parking in Parking Lot A. We've talked with them conceptually about enhancing that parking, and at the time they were willing to talk about that. We have not had conversations with the Wilkins Rogers Mill site because at the time that was long range, but that was far off before that would leave and become available. We know they've been on board with the pedestrian bridge crossing as well. Obviously, those conversations need to continue, especially with the mill site.
Thank you. A lot of my comments when I wrote in concerned economic development, and I'm just curious kind of what research that you've done so far on what will help not only the immediate Ellicott City area, but to convert the entire area into an economic driver that I think it can be. And part of my reason for asking this now is that the built environment and the economic environment can go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
And so, I've had some ideas about what anchor institutions could be, but they're not founded on anything. I haven't had the data. So, what kind of data do you have? What are your plans for pursuing that data? And now that we have a potential opening for a major part of the town where the Oella flour mill used to be, like, does that change anything?
Yeah, well, and our economic development team member is not here this evening, so I'll talk about as best as I can on this. But we, 2017 did a zip code survey. It was 2 zip code surveys for the visitors to the Ellicott City core area, and done over 2-week periods. And what that gives you is it gives you a very real snapshot of who's coming to Ellicott City, and through that we're able to see that it really is a visitation. It is a visitor market here. It's not just serving the local district. So that really sends some good news. Some of the per square foot real estate prices are some of the highest in the area. So that says that Ellicott City, the core, is an economic driver for the county. So so Trip Muldrow, some of his market data, he looked at the sources that he uses to look at. We've identified the trade areas based on those zip code surveys, and to see what the market potential was. And so I went through it pretty quickly, but the leakage, there's a huge opportunity for more food-related uses, whether it's restaurants or food shops or gourmet food places. Some of the pharmacies, galleries, maker spaces, and so forth. So there's a leakage in those uses that are going somewhere else, so we could capture them here. But it's really dependent on clear marketing strategy, really going after these uses, marketing them, nurturing them, and then also providing some of the spaces that can accommodate. We have a lot of small footprint areas in the core area, so we don't have many spaces like Sukasa or La Palapa of that size. When I talk about needing larger spaces, I don't mean a big box size, but it's more like Sukasa and La Palapa. So are there opportunities like in Lot D to introduce some of those spaces to attract some of those businesses that we don't have currently? I'm probably not the best if you maybe talk to me later, if you have some specific questions, I can connect you with Trip Muldrow, who could probably answer some of those in more detail. Yes.
Excuse me. I want to go back to the parking question. Big issue with Ellicott City has always been getting people in and out. So
Yes.
when they've looked at where these parking structures are going to be located and where people are going to be coming in and out, in their traffic study, are they considering that in terms of ease of movement and reducing the traffic off of Main Street, which has always been, for years and years and years, has always been an issue.
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. And one of the Lot D is the most centrally located parking lot, but that's the one that requires you to drive on Main Street to get to it. So there's a couple strategies we're looking at. We don't have the answer right now, but one is the bookend approach, where you really emphasize your resources at Lot F and Lot A, so you catch the people as they come in from both directions and keep them off Main Street. And the other strategy is, do you capture them in F and D to keep at least people to the upper end of Main Street, but not the lower end. But it's a great strategy, a great question. The other thing we're looking at, is there the potential, if you ever were to do a deck in Lot D, the opportunity to come in off of Old Columbia Pike to an upper level there, so you can capture some people before they get to Main Street to get into Lot D. But it is a real part of the strategy. It's also a challenge with the shuttle. With the traffic on Main Street, having a shuttle that runs all the way down Main Street is more of a challenge than one that maybe goes from the courthouse or this facility here down to the Lot F or Lot D area and then turns around and goes back. If you take the whole length of Main Street, that creates some other challenges with the traffic. So that's something our team's looking at in the overall strategy.
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, you've obviously done a lot of work here, and I like the designs. I think it's really good work. 20 years is a long time, and 5 to 7 years is a long time. I guess my question to you would be, if it were to flood again 3 months from now or a year from now or something like that, how would that affect this?
Well, I think everything we're showing here assumes that it could flood again in 3 months, but obviously the safe and sound flood mitigation, it takes time. The permitting, the actual logistic of constructing, it's going to take some time to do that, so we can't get around there. But the emergency alert systems, the audible and visible systems, those things can happen sooner. I know the county's working on those, better communications and alerts and getting people out of the area. Things like restricting the parking on Lower Main Street could happen now, so that if there is another flood, you can minimize the chances of cars becoming caught in the channels and the culverts. Also, construct anything like sidewalk construction now. The areas that are being redone are being done in concrete. That's more resilient to the floodwaters than the brick. So if there was another flood event, that can help protect some of the foundations and the utilities underneath.
Would you abandon your project?
No, like what aspect of the project? I mean, there's a lot of. What's that? No. This project, the elements in here are designed. They're not designed to, nothing's here designed to eliminate flooding completely, but they're designed according to a similar flood to what we had in 2018 and 2016.
I mean, if the flood happened before you got a chance to do anything.
No, it would obviously delay and create impacts, but it wouldn't change. Well, every flood is different, so it may reveal some new dynamics that need to be incorporated into the designs. But I think these the designs that are being studied and based on the H&H studies are done with a similar flooding in mind.
All right, we're going to take a couple more questions here. Got one right here.
Mine's just a quick comment. I saw amphitheaters and gathering spaces and things like that. I'd just recommend that perhaps adding to the list would be some sort of kids-focused area, whether it's a playground or a place for families as they're in town for kids to play, or residents with kids. I just think it'd be a nice gathering spot of a different nature that's not retail or restaurant or something,
Exactly,
but
yeah.
for the residents. But just a comment.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and especially up near the Bernard Ford House and Lot G, any park space in there could really incorporate that where you have more land area. That would be a great idea. Thank you.
All right, anybody else have any comments? Yep, right here up front, green, and we'll I'll make my way over there for.
I have a concern about Lot D and the proposed parking structure with the active space in front of it. What strikes me about that is that it misses the point about authenticity in terms of the history and character of Ellicott City. What seems more appropriate to me is why don't we build, as you refer to them, active spaces on the hillside, which I believe is the southern hillside along Old Columbia Pike, and actually do some of the things you talked about in terms of structures, stepping up a hillside and using the hillside creatively. And then keeping that event space, which is extremely important in my mind, which has certainly been demonstrated many times just this summer in terms of all the events that have been staged.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, in a perfect world, building more into that hillside would make a lot of sense. That's private property right now. So what we're looking at is assuming we're working within county-owned land. Ideally, that whole area would be looked at and planned together. And I appreciate the comment of that open space, because it really is a wonderful open quality. And that's where we're pushing the structure as far back as possible, so you keep some opening. And you could still have events in there. They might have to be laid out differently, but we think that's very important to continue being able to have events in there. So, but I think incorporating into the hillside would make a lot of sense. But again, that's private property there.
All right. Do we have a final question? Anybody? All right, one more time. Yellow.
About 2 years ago, they redid the water retention pond at the bottom of my development, but it hasn't worked properly. Is there any plan to do additional water retention ponds or to fix the things that we already have? And if anything like that happens to your plans, is there redress against something like that?
Which?
Ellicott Hills, where St. Peter's is?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anyone can address that comment. Well, wait, let's see if
anybody. Wait.
Let's follow.
Testing.
I think the real answer to your question is if you can get me the exact location, we can follow up with you and take a look at it. So I'm not sure exactly which pond it is and what the exact problems are.
Yeah, get together after this and exchange some information. I think we had one more over here, and then we'll kind of let you wrap it up, Tom.
I just want to know if you started any of the retention ponds yet.
The design, has the design, Mark, started on that?
No, the design, and then the construction will follow. A lot of it depends on permitting through the regulatory agencies right now, but H7, for example, is still is in a design process, and we say it's in design process, but it's gotten to a certain point where the agencies look at it to comment. So that is moving forward. There's another project on Quaker Mill, which is off Rogers Avenue, and that's in a very similar boat. So both of these projects, we're looking at final design being accomplished sometime this summer, if I'm not mistaken. And then we have, so that they are two ponds that the county is actively doing right now. It could possibly start as soon as FY21. I'll say it that way in terms of fiscal year, which is July 20 through 21.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. You're coming back. All right. All yours, Tom.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that's about it. So the presentation will be posted probably by tomorrow. The live video might be a couple days. And then the county is still working out when the survey and the online review would be implemented. So just stay tuned under the Ellicott City Master Plan website, and that will provide some updates for that information. So thank you very much for coming tonight. Appreciate your attendance. Thank you.